Look, I'm a very proud founder of what was Mercedes Australian Fashion Week, and established the event in 1996. It was an incredible journey up to that event. The idea that Australia could mount an international fashion week up against London, Paris, and Milan and New York. Well, I think, that first year in 1997, the highlights were, it's got to be the first show. I mean, it was first international runway show that Australia had ever produced. And it was Wayne Cooper. And, I'm not going to stand here and say that the collection itself was world-shattering, It was Wayne being Wayne with his great party girl outfits. But the savoir-faire and the attitude that we had on that catwalk, we'd brought back all Australia's big models to support. So we had Annalise Chabert, we had Amber Belfer, and of course Sarah O'Hare. All the big Australian girls at the time internationally, we got them back home and they all debuted within the Wayne Cooper show. The place was completely packed. It was at 9 a.m. in the morning, Marco and Jennifer had whipped up backstage into a frenzy. You can just imagine what Wayne was like backstage at his own show, surrounded by all these beautiful models and hair and makeup. I mean, there was champagne flowing well before any girl set foot on the catwalk. And that added to the whole sort of vibe of the whole place. And then, Wayne had an absolutely thumping rock and roll soundtrack. The sound system in that room just shook everyone's brains. And then, the show opened. It was just an incredible moment. You could just feel the energy in the room. And it's one of the only experiences I've ever seen at any fashion week anywhere around the world. As soon as the show was over, everybody in the room gave Wayne a standing ovation, and it was spine tingling. I mean, I was crying. It was beyond incredible, because it was an incredible sense of excitement. We did it, and relief all at the same time. And of course, just to get all those people in the room and seated in the right place, we had all sorts of problems with seating allocations and the ticketing system, but that all had been forgotten by the time the first model walked out. It was incredibly exciting.
Sydney Fashion Week, for which many years became known as Mercedes-Benz Fashion Week Australia, has been one of the most prominent fashion events in the Australia-Pacific region. At its zenith, it showcased the latest designer collections from established and also emerging designers from Australia to the globe, as well as local markets. Today, some would argue that Australian Fashion Week may have had its best days behind it, and it's not quite what it was. That being accepted, one cannot take away from the amazing impact that the launch of Fashion Week had in its early days. providing an international springboard for many emerging Australian labels, paving the way for their eventual global success.
Hi, I'm Jason Brunsden. I'm a fashion and lifestyle designer. I've been in the business since the early 80s, so it's about 40 years now. I got into the business when I left fashion college, and I dropped out because I was really excited to get into the workforce. And I started out as a fashion illustrator, and then I became a stylist, and I became a fashion editor at a magazine, traveled the world, went to the Paris shows all the time, did a lot of shoots all over the world, then went freelance, then moved to London and New York and shot with amazing people, Patrick Demarchelier and Linda and Christy and Naomi and all those girls. It was a brilliant time. Then came back here and started working at Morrissey Edmiston as a creative director. And after they broke up, I stayed with Peter at Morrissey for some time. And then in 2004, I launched my own brand.
Oh, look, Sydney in the 90s was like nowhere else, really. And I had just come back from living in London and New York, and I couldn't get over it. It was like the best place on earth because we had the Olympics coming up. We had the most incredible nightlife. I mean, I don't know how we survived. We were out the whole time. And then we get home and go pretty much straight to work a lot of the time as well. There was so much energy. It was just electric. There was just an electric feeling about Sydney in those days. And we were young enough to experience. We're in our 20s and 30s, a lot of us. And there was so much happening. There was so much creativity. It was just pulsating with energy. It was just amazing.
Sydney Fashion Week was first launched in 1996 by the New South Wales government as a platform to promote Australian fashion and foster local talents. The inaugural event took place in Sydney at the Royal Hall of Industries, featuring a mix of established and Australian designers, as well as emerging talent.
Well, the arrival of Australian Fashion Week, when Simon Locke got it up and running, the first year was 96. And we couldn't quite believe it, that it was actually going ahead. But it wasn't going ahead on a downsized, amateur almost kind of level. It was extraordinary. It was over-the-top spectacular. I mean, they had the... you'd walk in through the RHI, and I had my fashion sketches on giant banners hanging from the ceiling, and you walk through there into, I think it was into the Horden, and they'd built an enormous domed structure in the Horden. And in those days, it was still raised catwalks. It wasn't flat runway. So it was a giant raised catwalk, and I think it was about 2,000 people seated and tiered seating going down. And the production value was just incredible. It was so slick and so polished, and we couldn't believe the people that were coming. We had Anna Piaggi from Vogue Italia, we had Hilary Alexander from The Telegraph in London, Marion Hume. We had so many really influential people coming, and there were some just extraordinary shows. And it was just an explosion of talent. And what was really interesting about it was that, and not to put them down, but a lot of the designers, fashion designers in Australia, prior to that, had been very heavily influenced by what was going on overseas. And they did a beautiful job of it. They really did. But they were more editors, I think. They chose the right pieces. Whereas I think it was an explosion of originality. It was very sophisticated and polished, and you couldn't quite believe it was happening, I don't think. That was how exciting it was.
In its early days, Sydney Fashion Week was incredible, and it experienced remarkable growth and success. It was a must-attend event for the fashion industry professionals, including buyers, editors, influencers, and celebrities both local and international.
I am Alex Bonaventley. I'm now a design director working across multiple projects, from hotels globally to amazing restaurants and retail stores. But my history is pretty vast, because being ex-Melbourne, where there was an incredible flux of energy and fashion, I was at university and I decided to become a stylist, and I was exclusively doing men's fashion. I was very, very interested in bringing that Euro edge to everything. And moving to Sydney, I was fortunate enough to be appointed men's as a fashion editor for Vogue under Nancy Pilcher, which was an amazing experience for me. And with that came just this entree into this incredible social and fashion industry in Sydney. Being present in Sydney allowed me to be part of a very wonderful, bizarre, creative, exclusive group of very talented humans that made up the fashion industry of Australia. I had a brand for a number of years called Fashion Assassin, and it was a brand that was created out of this interest in. It was kind of like we were the original sustainable brand, and we were just customizing and drawing on existing garments. My take was sourcing incredible Italian military or ex-military garments from World War II and sourcing them out of various bonded warehouses in Europe, and then customizing them. So we were kind of like anti-war. We were the Peace Corps. So yeah, it was great. It was an amazing experience. It was amazing. We opened Fashion Week for a number of years, and it was a wild ride. And yeah, it was allowed me to be part of the Australian fashion fraternity, and it connected me with so many people that are still incredible mates of mine now. I was like slap bang in the middle of Sydney social scene, and luckily I was posted to Sydney because of Vogue Australia. So I was here to be part of a magazine and doing styling menswear shoots, and then from that became the fact that I was the men's stylist. the social scene in Sydney at that time in the late 90s was pretty robust. There was a lot of international activity. It was a couple of years before the Olympics, so there was this like burgeoning interest in the economy, and there was so many people just expressing themselves. Around that time, there was, not only the magazines, there was a lot of focus on personal style. Everybody was wanting to have that cut-through look, wanted to have something that was unique to themselves. So because of that, there was a number of brands that were just starting to gurgle up. There were these new and inspiring, very, very interesting people that were just coming through the ranks, not necessarily from fashion colleges. They were people that just had a unique perspective. They looked amazing and they wanted to change fashion in Australia. And that's what happened.
When we arrived back from London, we arrived into a really vibrant fashion scene in Sydney. So Mercedes Fashion Week had just sort of started, that had a few years under their belt. And there was a lot to choose from, in the way of great brands. There was a lot of, Australia had a great offering then. So there were, Subi was coming through, I think Kit Willow, Akira, Collette, some of the other brands. There was just a really vibrant sort of fashion scene. So it felt exciting to sort of be coming back to the country at that time. And I think we met Simon Locke around that time. There was just, we were getting a great presence from the international buyers and press. So it sort of was going hand in hand with that whole, burgeoning scene.
I think what really was exciting about the whole fact that Mercedes-Benz partnered with Fashion Week was that it really was a serious partnership, which meant for us designers that fashion was going to be taken seriously. And it was really a great opportunity to grow a business and to actually be able to make money from fashion here in Australia. So I think that was really important around that time. I mean, it was definitely a fantastic time. I think Australia was getting noticed on the global fashion scene. I think, so many of the top buyers and editors would come down for Fashion Week at that time. And so, once pre that, we, Australians would have to travel internationally to show our, collections. But now it was the first time that international buyers were actually
flocking to our shores
to see us. So that was very exciting.
Yeah, I really remember Australian Fashion Week and when it was launched by Simon Locke and that whole world. It was very exciting. It was for us. It was not actually something we were really involved in. We had an established business, but for those young up-and-coming brands, it gave them such a window of opportunity and access to buyers that they never would have been able to see otherwise. It was extraordinary foresight to have started it, and I think it's been a huge part of the success of our industry. Akira Isogawa and Fashion Week, they just kind of went hand in hand back then.
The event helped put Australian fashion on the international map and contributed to the rise of several influential designers. Sydney Fashion Week provided the platform for Australian designers to showcase their collections to a global audience. Many prestigious buyers from overseas came out in the early years. There was Saks, there was Nordstrom's, there was Browns, there was Selfridges, all looking to uncover the next big thing, the next unicorn that they could say they had discovered.
Well, a few things happened in the 90s. You had the massive onslaught, exodus of, manufacturing really started to sort of, and everyone thought it was great to become an importer. That's on the mass scale. Yes, Australian Fashion Week launched 1996. There'd been various attempts before, but Simon Locke pulled it off. And then you also had, let's not forget, the international brands started to arrive in a very, very... you had Louis Vuitton that set up on the corner of King and Castlereagh Street. Versace, I remember, arrived with a boutique. So those brands, they may have sold to boutiques here, but they didn't actually have a physical presence. Called Montana. You had, who else was there? There was a bunch of different brands that came. Gianni Versace, Jean Muir. And then you had some Australian brands that were in the show, and one brand, Covers, which was just basically knockoffs of Montana. Claude Montana actually apparently had to be physically restrained from attacking them when he saw their staff on the stage. So, that's not to say that Australian brands don't continue, some of them don't continue to copy. They do. They do research trips internationally. The big retailers all, even... younger or with smaller designers. But those brands have now got a very serious presence in Australia, and big businesses. They are very much here, the international brands.
Yeah, so from my perspective was very unique because it was not necessarily just, I was not a fashion designer or I was not a reporter of fashion. I was so immersed in the fashion industry because the nucleus of fashion in Australia came from creative beings that weren't necessarily fashion designers that went to fashion school. They were designers or people that were trying to express their creative emotions with fashion, because at that time, in the around the 2000s, the fashion industry in Australia was booming. I remember being part of a group of people that we were looking for Australian fashion, looking for menswear, looking for really great brands because there was nothing available to us. So we were just buying export travel around the world. And then something magical happened. Simon Locke created Fashion Week. There was a forum. There was a need to express ourselves. And we were not just participants and being part of it. Like I was reporting it for a magazine at that time, but I was also, jostling to be front row. I was really trying to be part of this group and realizing that it was an amazing cut-through opportunity to create a brand. And I know that a number of other people had the same headspace because we were all together socially anyway. We were all having dinners together, we were having lunches, or people from the Northern Beaches, from people from Newcastle, people from Melbourne. We were all talking at the same time about how do we change fashion in our way from our perspective.
But, Australian Fashion Week launched in the beginning. The Australian department stores really didn't want to sell Australian brands. They may have had some, and that was a bit of an uphill battle, but they got there in the end after a few years, and everyone started thinking and talking about wearing Australian again. And also people started exporting. Nikki Zimmerman, she'd been going for a few years, but when they showed the first Australian Fashion Week, they decided, well, what would be, the new buyers were coming down, and they thought, well, what would be easy to export? And they thought swimwear. So that's when they started swimwear, which they kind of then became known for as their hero products, really. It's only a component of their business, but so it opened the world's eyes to Australian fashion, and I think Australian businesses...
Well, what I remember was actually as I said 90s, like I was working like crazy, and then only actually people that I connected with was people from like within the industry. You know, because when you go to the event organized by Fashion Week or organized by sponsors of Fashion Week, and you encounter other designers, sure, like a Dan or, from Tsubi or Peter Morrissey. I mean, there are a lot of actually people encountered, like all within fashion industry. So we were like in a little like a bubble that we connected each other. And I don't think actually I never stepped outside of this bubble in 90s.
We got a world. But you're up the sun,
It helped launch the careers of renowned Australian designers such as Akira Isogawa, Collette Dinnigan, Subi, Sasson Bide, Zimmerman, Dion Lee, Romance Was Born, and so many others. These designers garnered international recognition and expanded their reach into global markets, thanks in part to their exposure at Sydney Fashion Week.
My name is David Bush. I am a business consultant in the fashion space. I'm a non-executive director. I'm an investor in businesses. But I guess in a previous life, I spent a lot of years, more years than I'd care to mention, as the GM of fashion at David Jones. Well, I think part of the job is building relationships with brands, and a big chunk of those brands were Australian designers as well as Australian sort of bigger national Australian brands.
Yeah, I think the 90s were a really important era. I think that there was a lot happening in Australia, particularly at the tertiary education level. So there was lots of great talent, both teaching and coming through that pipeline.
I think that business in general was pretty buoyant. And I think that, particularly toward the late 90s, early 2000s, and I can only speak of my experience at David Jones, we really decided that Australian product was where we wanted to be, and we launched the We Believe in Australian Fashion, We Believe in Australian Designer campaign. And nothing really had been done like that, at least not for a long time, not since the 70s, since the the David Jones Fashion Excellence Awards. But it really made them household names. So I think that for Australian fashion in that kind of fashion context, it was a really important period, that kind of late 90s, 2000s, because it really put those names in front of an audience that they would not have otherwise got to. I mean, they were on billboards, they were on backs of buses, they were on notice boards at the airport, they were on television, they were in newspapers, they were in every magazine in the country. And it wasn't a frock, it was them. It was their face, it was their name. And so I think the customer responded to that. The customer responded to these young, there's young creatives who had something to say and who really had something to offer. So I think it was a perfect storm in that regard.
Simon Locke and later IMG, International Management Group, played significant roles in the creation and later development of Australian or Sydney Fashion Week.
I'm Simon Locke, and as Chairman of Mercedes Australian Fashion Week, I'd like to welcome you to the Australian Embassy, along with our patron, the Premier of New South Wales, Mr Carr, and our Ambassador, Mr Spender. May 2000 will be the 5th year that the Australian designers have presented their spring-summer collections as part of the International Fashion Week circuit, a time when Sydney takes up its role alongside London, New York, Milan, and of course Paris, as the centre in the Asia-Pacific region to show ready-to-wear collections. The reputation of our event and designers has grown significantly over the past few years, and now a number of our designers are showcased in Europe's leading boutiques and department stores. The first year of the new millennium is set to be an exciting one, especially as Sydney plays host to the Olympic Games. I'd like to extend an invitation to you on behalf of myself and our patron Mr Carr to attend Mercedes Australian Fashion Week next year and experience firsthand not only our wonderful city, but also our innovative and creative designers. And I hope you enjoy a glimpse of this year's Australian Designer Spring-Summer collections.
Simon Locke was an Australian entrepreneur who played a pivotal role in shaping Sydney Fashion Week during the early days. He was appointed as the event's director in 1996 at the launch and served in that capacity till 2004. Under his leadership, Sydney Fashion Week saw significant expansion and international recognition. Locke brought his expertise in event management and PR to elevate Sydney Fashion Week to a global standard. He focused on attracting international media and buyers, helping establish it as an important platform for showcasing Australian fashion on the world stage. Locke's efforts were instrumental in securing partnerships and major sponsors and establishing relationships with influential industry figures in fashion media and also in retail, in Australia and also internationally.
Simon Locke was such a frontiersman with Australian Fashion Week that his perspective was to put Australia on the map and to focus purely on local talent. If that had happened maybe 6 years before, it wasn't that perfect storm. The perfect storm was at that time when there was already these brands that were starting to develop, but they wouldn't have had a forum. They would have been a small brand that may have been picked up in one of the market pages in one of the magazines, but because there was an ability to showcase these brands live to an audience. And then not only that, the captive audience then told more people, then they were covered in magazines. And then with Australian Fashion Week also, the newspapers were covering.
At that time in the early 90s was something that was actually unthought of. But we'd seen all the incredible media coverage and the buyers attending these magnificent events overseas. And I sort of asked the question, well, why couldn't we have an event like that here in Australia, invite all the world's media and buyers to come and see what I saw as incredible talent in the Australian fashion industry. So it started off by really, I guess, gathering a momentum of enthusiasm within the Australian industry to do that. And initially there was a lot of people that thought it was just wasn't humanly possible. But over time, the momentum built, and I guess my persuasion of working with the designers and working with the sponsors and working with the governments. And we had some great supporters at the time. People like Carla Zampatti, people like Anita Keating, who became the patron of the event. They got support from people like Peter Collins, who was the Treasurer of New South Wales at the time, and the federal government. And it slowly built and built and built until we were able to bring, everyone together, this great catalytic event that brought the Australian fashion industry en masse together for the first time in May 1996. How could we bring all the Australian designers together? So it was really through the clients that we had at Spin at the time. We were also working in the early days with Zimmerman and Bettina Liano, Morrissey Edmondson at the time. So we really had these relationships and doors open with these designers to start to talk about the idea of Australian Fashion Week.
My name is Nicholas Huxley. I was the head of the fashion design studio at TAFE since 1990. Before that, I've been actually teaching for nearly 40 years. I finished in 2018 after some adventures around the world, and I am currently mentoring designers in Fiji. Over that 40 years, I've had the great pleasure of seeing some, I'd say, sort of stalwarts of the fashion industry come through the school that I've mentored, people like Akira, Isogawa, Alex Perry, the guys from Romance Was Born, Anna and Luke, Bianca Spender. Then we go on to people like Dion Lee, Nikki Zimmerman, and it just goes on and on. There's lots and lots of them. I've been very, very, very lucky that I had that period where those people actually came to that school and I got to grow with them, watch their talent grow and then become successful.
I'm embarrassed to say that I was at the first Australian Fashion Week. That's how long ago it was. But I think Simon and the crew saw an opportunity again, like David Jones, to showcase Australian fashion. And nobody had really cared enough to put those kids together, put those people together and showcase them in the way that he did. And he managed to, drag by the ear Selfridges and Saks and a whole lot of others who came and were, pleasantly surprised. I think they came on a whim, free holiday to Sydney, and walked away with some significant business partnerships. And I think, that's been a tremendous thing for Australian fashion. I mean, it's still going. And I think, it's probably the only body that's still supporting Australian fashion in that way.
Yeah, I mean, when Australian Fashion Week started, I remember Simon Locke contacted me and basically put it forward to what they intended. So I sat on a few meetings with Simon about it, right, how exciting the whole idea was. And I tell you what, it was those months building up to the first one was really exciting. Do you know that at this year's Fashion Week, I was the only person there who'd been to the first ones. Nobody turns up anymore, which I found really sad. Anyway, look, it was very exciting times, and I do remember once it was nearly happening, he rang me beside himself. Because what had happened, he'd brought an Italian company out here to show how it works. And they brought up in this meeting, so ushers, dressers, behind the scenes work, and he was like, what? All right? And he was just like, oh my God, he hadn't thought about it. He'd thought about the models, the runway, the lighting, the sound, production, right? Hadn't thought about any of the stuff puts it together. He rang me, he said, I need your help. And I said, what's going on? And he told me, and I said, leave it to me, right? So I organised all our students. In those days, I ran Leon Whitehouse, got all the Whitehouse students. Well, any school that was going, I said, what an amazing time this is going to be for them. How great the learning being backstage at Fashion Week. And that's how he originally got all the students to work back at Fashion Week. It was an exciting time. An exciting time. Productions, like those designers were put on the most fabulous parades, runway shows, and parties, after parties. It was so special. Because I've been to the first one, I've slowly seen it change.
It was incredibly important for me that it was seen as world-class from day one, that we couldn't be seen to be amateur hour in the Southern Hemisphere. It was every part of my being screamed out that, Australia's entry into the International Fashion Week circuit needed to be on par with London, Paris, Milan and New York. We couldn't be seen from day one as being a second-class entry in this very prestigious league of fashion weeks. And so everything we did from day one set ourselves as that goal. So what was really important to be able to achieve that level and standard of production was two things. One, we had to be well-funded, because this was going to be expensive. And secondly, we needed to surround ourselves with the best people in the world. And so we worked both those hand in hand. I mean, the commercial side of the event was always extraordinarily important because, the Australian designers didn't have the funds back then to be able to fund themselves or to invest much into the event, although they certainly did contribute. But really, it was the New South Wales government initially who really, put their hand in their pocket for a significant amount of money. And Bob Carr and others were incredibly supportive of the event because they really believed in my vision and this vision for Sydney. And also remember, we were leading up to the Olympics as well. And so to put a cultural event on this map for Australia and Sydney was also equally important. We got the support of the federal government. And then we had a really sort of interesting situation is that I'd gone around to the other fashion weeks, London, Paris, Milan and New York, and introduced myself. I met all the principals and told them about our plans. And I spoke to them about we were going to create commercial sponsors for a fashion week. And they all laughed at me. They said, we'll never have commercial sponsors involved in our fashion week. We'll never have a naming rights partner. And of course, I led the charge around the world with, Australian Fashion Week was the first fashion week ever to have a naming rights partner, and that was Mercedes-Benz. And what an incredible partner to have. Mercedes-Benz, one of the most prestigious brands in the world, associating themselves with a fledgling industry. And that really helped us put us on the map. And we had a wonderful chairman in Asia Pacific by the name of Bernd Schleckham, who was elderly. He was nearly approaching 70 when he was running Mercedes-Benz, and he'd put all their sponsorship money into the orchestra and the symphony and opera and all these old people's sort of events. But he had a vision for Mercedes that he knew that there was new cool cars coming, and he needed to connect with a younger, more stylish audience. And he saw the vision in Australian Fashion Week, and he backed me incredibly.
And Alicia Burr, Chloe Maxwell, Shayna, Rob Burstman, Joey Healy. Such a great walk. Sarah. And that giant domed building they built within the building, I think. And that was extraordinary. We couldn't believe what was happening. It was just so polished. Ah, there it is. No, that was great. Smoking on the runway. So 90s. Shit. Get away. Bracewell.
everyone, the brands or labels or designers, whatever we used to call them designers then, showing everybody had a unique look, and you knew who you were looking at. It was all quite different. Like Morrissey was very different to Collette, and Collette was very different to Akira, and everyone had a unique look. I think perhaps things are a bit more generic now. I find it hard to distinguish between certain designers and brands. Well, I just saw Robert Burton on it must have been the first Fashion Week. I think Robert was hilarious. Campbell in Christmas, and just a huge personality, fantastic laugh. He was like Hamish Bowles or someone. He was like a character from a Cecil Beaton film or something. You know, you had that kind of 20th century personalities where everyone was very different. I mean, Peter Morrissey was bigger than life, you know. He was a huge personality, a genius at marketing, and everybody wanted to look like him, the way he looked in the clothes. It was very clever. Akira he was a funny, extraordinary, very shy personality. Yeah, it was all about the different people and the personalities and all the people working on the shows, and it was a very happy time, I think. People were very excited to be working at Fashion Week. Everyone was generally very, very up and very excited. I think there was such a level of excitement. And it was also, it was work, you know. There were buyers there and there were media there. It was long before social media. We barely even had internet. So it was really about magazines, newspapers, and buyers and fans. So, you know, and the room was big enough to invite a lot of your friends and your customers. So the atmosphere was up because they were the ones that were howling and shouting.
And so with the combination of the government, with Mercedes-Benz, we had the money. So then we had, okay, well, you know, Australia had never produced runway shows before. You know, they'd produced parades at Myers and David Jones. And back in the days, they were very rudimentary fashion shows. And what London, Paris, Milan and New York was doing was at another level. And so I went again around the world, which I was doing many times leading up to the first Australian Fashion Week. And we found a group of producers that were the best in the world. Marco Macapane and his team were from Milan. They had produced all the great shows from Versace to Armani. You know, he was married to Angela Missoni at the time. He was producing shows in New York and Paris, and it's just like, and we really clicked. We bonded, and he was like fashion's version of rock and roll Elvis. He was just a larger-than-life character, and was so generous with everything he had to offer. And he came along with his partner at the time, Jennifer Siness, who was an expert model caster and knew everything about hair and makeup. And together we formed a team to produce the first shows at Australian Fashion Week. And they were exceptional and they were world standard. The thing that really surprised everyone, I think, on that first day in May, when they walked into the showgrounds at Sydney, the Fox Studios now, and we had been able to get the huge big tents that were getting prepared for the Olympics, these enormous and beautiful venues, and we built collection shows in them like Australia had never seen before. The scale, the size, the backdrops, the 30-metre long catwalks, the tiered seating. It was just astounding. When people walked into that room, it was just jaw-dropping. I mean, they were expecting to see a nice salon show they might have seen at Myer. And here they were in a world-class fashion show theatre, ready to experience the first show that was ever on the catwalk, which was Wayne Cooper.
Oh, I think, Simon Locke, whatever anyone says about Simon, he was a genius for doing it and setting it up. And I think the biggest impact that I think Australian Fashion Week had on the industry here was putting an end to plagiarism. because the buyers did come out that first season and go, there's a little bit of Gucci, there's a little bit of Balenciaga, there's a little bit of, Dior, and there's Louis, whatever, walking down the catwalk. And it kind of, in a way, seeded the fact that designers had to get their own look and create their own DNA, which I think was the biggest advantage the Australian fashion industry had, because we started seeing brands that got their own life and were being sold overseas as a brand. And I think, from then it had got a lot of attention overseas and it got a lot of press as well. And I think particularly, which I was always saying, and it's moved to now Fashion Week only being for resort, which I always thought it should have been, rather than, I think it was, can't remember, the show was a lot later, so it was kind of not in the resort, and it was not in the summer or not in the fall collections. But I do think Australia is really, it's like Brazil. It's the resort countries of the world with two big fashion industries. Brazil kind of promotes a lot of their swimwear and kind of resort wear, but Australia really has a collection of designers now.
So I'm going to ask you questions.
Yeah.
And in this interview, I'm not actually going to hear it. You won't hear me. It'll just be your voice talking to an off-camera video. When you're answering the says, well, I can remember the 90s. So, quiet on the set. So, Jason, we'll start off with you introducing yourself for those who don't know you. Start with your name, and kind of give a bit of a back history of your many and varied involvements.
How long has it got? It's 40 years.
Try to keep relatively short.
Okay, all right.
Because we'll get into it more deeply.
Okay.
After that.
All right. Hi, I'm Jason Brunsden. I'm a fashion and lifestyles designer, business when I left fashion college, and I dropped out because I was really excited to get into the workforce. And I started out as a fashion illustrator, and then I became a stylist, and I became a fashion editor at a magazine, traveled the world, went to the Paris shows, did a lot of shoots all over the world, then went freelance, then moved to London and New York and shot with amazing people, Patrick Demarchelier and Linda and Christy and Naomi and all those girls. It was a brilliant time. Then came back here and started working at Morrissey Edmiston as a creative director. And after they broke up, I stayed with Peter at Morrissey for some time. And then in 2004, I launched my own brand.
What was so fantastic about the early days of Fashion Week was that everyone that was sharing experiences, at nightclubs and at restaurants and at bars that were part of the industry were able to have an input into designing or creating, being part of the lighting or designing a set, or artists were involved with prints for a garment. It kind of created this bigger industry for all of us. I mean, with Fashion Assassin, one of the things that we focused on was supersonically huge shows. So we would, one year we took over Luna Park. We took 780 people on a glass ferry across. Luna Park was shut down, and then we had Tim Robards, famous Tim Robards, turned all the lights on, and we had Luna Park come to life for us. So the production involved in that, from PR to makeup artists to aerial artists to hundreds of models, it was massive. And I think the excitement to produce was as exciting, to produce an event was as exciting as producing a collection.
There were a lot of brands that came up in the 90s. I mean, we had Morrissey Edmiston, we had Zimmerman, Wayne Cooper. There were so many great brands that came through in fashion. And I think a lot of it was a rebellion against how conservative Australian fashion had been as fashion in the 70s and 80s. It had nothing to do with surfwear or the pioneering brands or any of that. It was more a reaction against how conservative the fashion had been here in a way. It was more of it was like a youth quake. It was a youth rebellion.
IMG, the owner of many of the world's major fashion weeks and also model agencies, is part of a global sports fashion media company, part of the giant sprawling Endeavour Group, has been also a key player in the success and development of Sydney Fashion Week. In 2005, IMG acquired the rights to produce and manage Australian Fashion Week through its event production, marketing and international reach. IMG's involvement brought a new level of professionalism and international exposure to Sydney Fashion Week. The company leveraged its global network and resources to attract international designers, buyers and media outlets to the event. This helped further elevate the profile of Australian Fashion Week and also create opportunities for the designers to expand their international markets.
In Sydney in the late 90s, the environment, the centre of Sydney, Darlinghurst, Potts Point, Elizabeth Bay, the city, King's Cross, was just this epicentre of cool and style and happening. We had Kinsella's, we had the Grand Pacific Blue Room, we had Michael Hutchins turning up with Helena Christensen, we had Morrissey Edmondson coming out with Elle Macpherson. It was just, we had, In Excess were the biggest band in the world, It was just such an incredible mix match of film and television and new magazines coming up. It was just incredibly vibrant, and this was the ecosystem that Australian Fashion Week was born into. And one of the leading cheerleaders, if you like, of this whole era was Peter Morrissey and Leona Epenston. They were the coolest cats in the school, and they, along with their extended designer posse, people like Jason Brunson and others, were really, the epitome of super cool. And so we harnessed all that and brought that into to Australian Fashion Week. And one of the catalysts to filling our schedule for the first year is, I was speaking to all the regular suspects, and everyone's going, oh, well, I'm only going to do it if they're going to do it, and I'll only do it if they're... And so we went straight to Peter and Leona and said, look, you're the coolest cats in the school here. If you commit to Australian Fashion Week, everybody else is going to. And, God love Peter particularly, he completely backed myself and the vision to the hilt and stood on his soapbox and said, right, we're in, who's following? And everybody followed. Obviously Saba was there in the beginning, Patino Liano, Zimmerman, Akira, everybody came involved. And really harnessed that incredible kinetic energy that was going on around Sydney at that time in the late 90s.
In the 1990s, partially due to the creation of Fashion Week, the Australian fashion industry experienced several breakout moments that propelled designers onto the international stage.
The first Morris Edmiston show was Fashion Week 96, and Peter and I came up with the idea of a revolving staging so that all the spotlights and the music had all just scattered around, and it finally came into this giant spotlight, and the stage revolved in a little intimate setting of a very sexy topless guy lying on a couch with Sarah O'Hare in a white leather pantsuit, hair slicked back, smoking a cigarette. It was sexy, it was intimate, and it was just explosive.
mean, the whole show was just explosive. It was electrifying. I mean, the music was incredible. The casting was amazing. I remember when we were putting it together, we'd never really done runway shows before. So we just kept doing more and more outfits. I think we got to about 150 outfits. We didn't really know that we were supposed to only show about 50. So we just kept going. But the show probably went for about half an hour then, I think, in those days. But you didn't think that it was going on for too long because it was just so electrifying.
Yeah, I think the first Morrissey Edmonds show at the first year of Australian Fashion Week was just rock and roll personified. I mean, Marco and Jared Clark, who was his understudy at that time, who was part of our team, learning everything from Marco, and Peter had come up with this quite ludicrous and expensive, I might add, idea of this revolving turntable at the aperture of the catwalk, and then that was going to start the show. And the image, I think, that they created is still etched in everyone's mind as one of those key images of the Australian fashion industry. The catwalk was mirrored, it was all black, it was shiny, one spotlight on the back area of the catwalk where the turntable was. The turntable slowly turned round, and there was Sarah O'Hare in this incredible white leather Morrissey suit, with a cigarette that she just dropped, buttered, and then just did the most amazing strut down around the catwalk. Honestly, the place just went absolutely crazy. And again, this was another image in that first year that really not just cemented Morrissey Edmondson in history, I guess, but also everyone was just saying, we can do this. Look at how good we are. It just gave everyone that self-confidence. And of course, everyone was up in the ante from there. Okay, how can I beat that? How can I do that? How can I do this? And this collective enthusiasm and self-confidence which came out was really, the greatest outcome of that first year, when the Australian fashion industry en masse, the producers, the PRs, the buyers, the media, the models, the hair and makeup, the stylists, the set designers, the lighting guys, the models, the designers, when we all came together, the students, the backstage, the ushers, when we all came together, this catalyst that we created of self-confidence was really what the winning formula was.
The Morrissey show was exceptional because obviously, being part of a group of people that were all very, very close, we'd all help each other, and Jason and Peter were two of my best friends, and at that time when they were designing that collection, it was at a time that there was a big Tom Ford Gucci moment in the world, and this sort of super luxe, dark and single spotlight, that feel of entering into this blackened world was sort of key to the experience, and Morrissey really captured that in Australia. And that revolving stage that revealed Sarah was just iconic.
There was so much flux and so many people and so many shows, but rising from some of the shows, when you remember one show, like that Morrissey Edmondson show, you then start to remember it in totality. You remember the looks, you remember the shapes, I remember the colours, the lighting, it's not just like a snapshot. It was an experience that just really resonated.
After Peter and Leona split, and I stayed working with Peter, and I think the shows that we did from the late 90s to the early 2000s were probably the best shows that have been shown, if I may say so myself, at Fashion Week in Australia, because they were very, very polished, and they were shows, they were big shows, and we had great models and great clothes, and it was always an event. Like, it was very polished, and it was just this spectacle of sex and style and everything, and it was amazing. first Morrissey Edmiston show in 1960 after party was in a separate part of the whole show location area, and it was sponsored by Absolute Vodka. So Peter got all the topless barmen from the Albury Hotel, and I think they had Absolute tattooed on their chests or something, and they were topless, and it was pretty wild. There was a private room out the back, and I don't remember much of that. But the after parties were probably every bit as spectacular as the shows.
There was Akira Isogawa, a Japanese-born Australian designer who achieved significant success during this period. Isogawa's kimono-inspired designs seamlessly blended his Japanese heritage with contemporary Australian style, showcasing intricate detailing and exquisite craftsmanship. Akira's work has been showcased on runways worldwide, especially in Paris, where he showed for several years along with his idols of Rei Kawakubo, Yohji Yamamoto. And he's received numerous accolades and recognitions for his contributions to the industry. Collette Dinnigan was another renowned Australian designer who gained prominence during the 1990s. Known for her feminine romantic designs, Dinnigan captivated audiences worldwide with her intricate and lacework and incredible adornment and embellishments. Subi, formerly known as Subi with a T, emerged in the late 1990s. And who can forget the Rats? They were a rebellious and edgy denim-based streetwear brand founded by a group of surfer mates, Dan Single, George Gorrow, Gareth Moody. And the label quickly gained a cult reputation, famed for its distressed denim and bold graphics and provocative fashion campaigns. Subi's early success exemplified the growing influence of Australian streetwear on the global fashion scene. Arriving the very same year as Subi, we had Sass & Bide, founded by best friends Sarah Jane Clark and Heidi Middleton. And they also exploded onto the scene in the early 2000s. The brand's signature aesthetic combined bold prints, innovative silhouettes, and a sense of bohemian luxury. Sass & Bide achieved international recognition through collaborations, runway shows, and partnerships with major retailers. The brand went on an international rampage, showing season after season in London and New York fashion weeks. And to this day, the brand continues to be a success and remains one of the most loved Australian brands. And then there is Dion Lee. Dion Lee's journey from a fashion student in Sydney to an internationally acclaimed fashion designer is a testament to the talent, innovation and hard work that he has. His designs not only redefined Australian fashion, but have made a significant impact on the global fashion landscape. Lee's ability to evolve and adapt to the changing fashion world, combined with his commitment to ethical and sustainable practices, positions him as a leading figure in the industry's future. As we look forward to that future, it's clear that Dion Lee will continue to push boundaries, influence trends, and inspire the next generation of designers. And finally, Zimmermann. Now, Zimmermann was another fashion brand that emerged from the early fashion weeks in 1996. And since then, it's marked its ascent into becoming an internationally recognised fashion brand with an astounding multi-billion-dollar valuation from a sale in 2023. Through the creative vision, unique aesthetic, shrewd business management of Nikki's husband, Chris Oliver, and the sisters' commitment to quality and continual improvement, the brand has captivated the hearts of fashion enthusiasts worldwide with its focus on sustainability, ethical practices. Zimmermann continues to inspire, solidifying its position as a leading force in not only the Australian but the global fashion industry.
I look at Zimmermann and, where they're international. They're not, they've managed to stay the distance of time or survive whatever's, needed to be an international brand with international stores. It's not an easy thing to do.
Under IMG's management, Sydney Fashion Week continued to evolve and innovate. the event expanded beyond the, traditional runway shows to include digital presentations, interactive experiences, and industry-focused programs. IMG also introduced the Mercedes-Benz Fashion Week program, which showcased the collections of a respected designer each year. Furthermore, IMG involvement enabled Sydney Fashion Week to be built into the international broader calendar, and the company aligned the event with the International Fashion Week circuit, positioning it within the global fashion industry.